Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to Development Discourse, where we ideate for Africa's development. My name is Patrick Okibo. I'm the founding partner at Next Year. Next Year is a multi-competency advisory firm that's focused on helping address complex development challenges within the continent. Every generation inherits a society it did not fully choose and must decide what to do with it. Accept it, endure it, or take responsibility for remaking it. That decision ultimately belongs to the people. We often frame development as a technical task, better policies, smarter budgets, stronger institutions. These things matter, but history tells us that they are not enough. Societies develop when people come to believe certain things about themselves, about others, and about what is acceptable to them. Development is not only engineered, it is learned, it is practiced, indeed it's cultural. Ideas, stories, symbols, and shared moral expectations have always preceded change, from liberation literature to anti-apartheid songs to even NSAS movement in Nigeria. Indeed, culture is how societies imagine different futures and sometimes demand that different future. Our guest today has devoted his life to wrestling with these questions through poetry, performances, and theater, and civic engagement that refuses comfort and demands reflection. Dike Chukwumerije is one of those people you say needs no introduction and really does not need an introduction. Lawyer, poet, cultural activist, Dike, welcome to Development Discourse.
Thank you for having me, Patrick. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Now, let's begin with this idea that sits really underneath all of development debates, but is rarely confronted directly, culture. When you speak through poetry and your public work, you treat culture as very fundamental to development. In your view, what does this mean to treat culture as almost development infrastructure rather than decorative art that we put on the wall or we listen to on our iPod?
Thank you for the question, Patrick. I am a poet, but I studied law, and I actually did a master's in law and development. I was very intrigued from my undergraduate days with the question, why is Africa underdeveloped? It was a question I couldn't get out of my head. And so I decided to do a master's in law and development. And while studying, we'll discuss one development theory after the other, modernization theory, import substitution, industrialization, export-led growth. And I would always situate these discussions in the context of Nigeria. And every time we're having these discussions, I would be thinking of Nigeria. And I would always be amazed by the fact that they would say, oh, this theory says you need this to develop. And I'll think, but we have that. We have these laws. Yeah, they may not be perfect, but they're there substantially. We have these institutions. They're there substantially. And I couldn't really find an explanation for why Nigeria was not where it ought to be, going by these different theories. And I sort of slowly drifted to the conclusion that ours was not a problem of laws and institutions, so to speak, but it was a question of attitudes and values and how people behaved and how they saw things. And that whatever system or institution you put into place in Nigeria, because of the underlying culture, that institution or system will be perverted in a certain way. And that for us, it may not be the same for every other country in terms of the bottleneck problem. But I felt very strongly that for Nigeria, the bottleneck problem was culture, that if you didn't fix the culture, it didn't matter what you put on top of it, what constitution you brought, what economic ideology you brought, what laws you brought, that the culture would pervert it. And interestingly, many people, they finish a master's and they do write a dissertation, which I did. But when I finished my master's, being a poet, I published my first collection of poems as a result of my experiencing of that topic. And it was titled "The Revolution Has No Tribe." That was really my first very conscious and intentional attempt to engage with cultural issues, because that was where my own learning and studying had got me to, that culture was our problem.
And I know you set up the Dike Chukwumerije Center, where you're focused on these culture questions. Which ideas do you think we must urgently unlearn? What are these cultural issues that have put us on and sustained us on this path of underdevelopment that we really need to unlearn?
There are several thoughts and ideas that we take as a given in Nigeria that we need to unlearn and we need to begin to challenge. And one is the idea that Nigeria itself is an artificial construct, and therefore an illegitimate construct, because it was constructed by people. That's a very deeply ingrained thought in the Nigerian mind that needs to be deconstructed, because it is not true. Every nation is a construct. There are no natural nations. Everyone was put, even the tribe, the ethnic group is a construct. So the idea that the Nigerian nation is artificial, but the ethnic group is natural, which many Nigerians hold on to, is something that we need to challenge and shake for us to progress as a nation. The idea that you sort of have these ethnic groups, certain ethnic groups can't get along. It's not something that you can fix. That the animosity between certain groups is sort of natural and can be fixed, is another idea that we have to challenge. That peace and conflict are also constructs. They're also social constructs. And that getting along has nothing to do with being similar or being from the same lineage, that two people can come from the same womb and be lifelong enemies, and two people can come from very different places and be allies and friends. That it has more to do with how you frame issues. So for starters, these are two ideas in the Nigerian psyche that one has to challenge, that that Nigeria is artificial and therefore illegitimate, and that the animosities between ethnic groups is fixed in nature, and there's nothing anybody can do about that.
By the way, I just had a brilliant conversation with Max Yolum on one of his more recent books, where he dwells on Nigeria pre-colonialism and shows how we intermarried, we traded, and all of that.
Absolutely.
To show
Absolutely.
that this idea of Nigeria being a mere geographic expression, is not true.
Absolutely.
But, I mean, so why is this idea, which seems simple, that culture underlies development, why is it difficult for Africa's, policy elite to understand and to focus on? I know you're beginning to address it at the center, but why did it take us this long, for you to come along to start, shining the spotlight on it? Why is it difficult for us to understand, and what should we be doing? What are you learning from your engagements at the center that we should be doing more broadly across the continent?
I think it's been difficult for us to arrive here because the questions, developmental questions, are generally framed from outside of the country. So, just like I said, the way I stumbled upon the question, doing a master's in development, these questions are being framed by academics and intellectuals that are outside of your space. And they may not be asking the right questions for your space. You can ask generic questions, but the right questions for your space. So I think for a long time, we've not been asking the questions that our own society is asking and trying to answer those questions because of sort of a Western leaning orientation to developmental problems. That's one. And then two, culture is notoriously difficult to cultural problems are difficult to articulate, they're difficult to
Yep.
fix. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot easier to say we need a road or we need a new law or we need to build a new institutions. These are very easy fixes.
Mm-hmm.
And so people latch on that because culture is just a lot messier. And there hasn't been a lot of, at least until recently, there hasn't really been a lot of structured study of cultural problems and how to fix them. A lot of times when people talk of culture, they start looking at like sort of indigenous culture or traditional culture. But we're talking about civic culture, not
Exactly.
not traditional or indigenous culture, civic culture. So it's something that hasn't been studied properly in terms of how to engage with it. So I think these are two reasons why it takes so long to get here. And even when you get here, people are reluctant to, they don't really know how. So what do we do about it?
Mm-hmm.
Is the question. So that's why we struggled with it, not just in Nigeria, but around the world, in other countries where culture is the problem.
Mm. Let's talk a bit about poetry, yeah, as a way of civic intervention. So your poetry often functions almost like a moral mirror, a form of intervention as well to us who receive it, to the people who it's intended for. But how do you see poetry? Should it be more a tool for diagnosis, saying here's what the problem is, or for provocation, getting us to pay attention to what the issues are, or therapy, helping us deal with them? How do you situate poetry? What should it do for us in this our journey to development?
I belong to the school of thought that art should not just be for art's sake,
Mm,
and that art should be very much engaged with the struggle for social change. So clearly, I do not believe in using poetry primarily for entertainment,
hmm
which would be where things like using it as a tool to escape your reality,
hmm
opium of the masses, so to speak.
hmm
Not that there is anything wrong with that. It's also important that people who are dealing with issues to which they cannot imagine solutions don't overheat. So it's important that there's something that sort of cools people down
hmm hmm
when there is no solution to a problem. So that's a very important role that art plays. But I believe that in a society like ours, where the problems are subconscious, are mental, are psychological, are emotional, that we need to realize that intellectual discourse is going to be limited in its ability to tackle these issues because of the mental barriers that people put up, and also because of how emotionally charged some of the root problems are. So people tend to have polite speak. So in a public gathering, they would have politically correct statements they make, but then there are emotions and thoughts and things they have in their heart that
hmm
they hold on to that continue to sort of pervert. You agree on something, but the outcome, the way it looks in society is different from the way it was on paper because it's
hmm
being filtered through these subconscious things. And this is
Filters.
where art becomes very powerful because art is able to engage with you at the level of the subconscious. It's able to deal with your emotions, it's able to deal with your heart, it's able to really bring you to a place of honesty, first of
Mm,
all, to accept that this is actually what I think, to be able to say it that, yes, I don't like Igbo people.
hmm
Yes, I think Fulani people are. Art is able to bring you to bring that out of you in a kind of safe space, in a
mm,
safe environment, and then can begin to deal. Because one of the most powerful tools that we have as artists is the ability to evoke empathy, to sort of situate you in the mind, in the life, in the shoes of the other,
mm,
and for you to begin to empathize with the other. I always say that you can disagree with me vehemently, But the moment you understand where I'm coming from, you can't hate me.
Exactly.
Understanding where seeing it through my eyes sort of neutralizes the capacity to hate me. You can still disagree, you can still fight with me. And we're not really trying to fighting, and conflict is natural to human society. But at least we need to move to a place where there is respect in the way we fight because we understand and see where each person is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
So back to your question, I see poetry as a tool, not just for helping us to understand, that is foundational, understand where we are, but also trying to point the way forward, that this is where we ought to be going. So I definitely use poetry in that sense in
So
my own practice.
I hear what you said about, there's room for the feel good art, but there's also room for more of the liberation type art. Now, if you look at art broadly, in Nigeria, so here I'm thinking music, I'm thinking movies, theater, even just the visual arts, graphics, etc. One might say that it appears we've moved away since the return to democracy, that we've lost that activism, that it's almost like we got democracy and we felt we've achieved the goal. So everyone's gone partying now, forgetting that democracy needs to be tended, needs to be carefully watched. Do you agree that maybe artists have slept on that responsibility, or is it all part of it?
I definitely think that there has been an upsurge in the sort of feel good art in the last maybe 15, 20 years, very different from sort of that independence generation where there was a more widespread consciousness of the need to engage using your art.
Mm-hmm.
Art should always be entertaining. You
Mm-hmm.
can never take that away from art. But using somebody like Fela as an example, extremely entertaining and yet extremely conscious, extremely engaging. That was sort of where we were coming from.
Mm.
I'm not sure, I've never really reflected on why, over time there has been this shift to sort of the more entertaining form of the art without the consciousness. What has driven this? I've never really reflected on it in terms of what the causes could be, but I think that now it is definitely more profitable to be entertainment focused as an artist. The market and society rewards you better and quicker. So the economic incentive to go down that route is very strong. And for whatever the reasons that set the incentives like that, that's the reality that young creatives are coming into. So there's a
Mm.
lot of pressure on them to, even those that are by nature conscious and serious, are towing the path of entertainment because of the pressure to get rich or become famous really quickly. And therefore, it requires an extra level of character, determination, consciousness of one's purpose to stay on a more conscious path as a creative. And I come from a family of creatives. My dad was a writer. My mom is a storyteller. My elder brother is a poet. My sister is an artist. So I come from a family of creatives and
You
a
forgot your
tradition.
brother who's the musician.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was a heritage of conscious creativity. So I grew up with paintings of Che Guevara, Kwame Nkrumah, all these people around the world. So you knew that, look, your art is a tool and you're supposed to use it to try and make society better. So in a way, my upbringing explains me, why I am the way I am, in spite of the wider social incentives. But
Mm.
having found myself in the place that I am, I realized that it's very important for people like me to sort of raise a standard and be an example to younger creatives because nothing inspires you to continue along a path as somebody else that is ahead of you who appears to be succeeding on that path. There are
Mm.
not many positive examples of conscious artists who are doing well, and therefore, those of us that are in that field, we really need to stand strong because we need I don't need the entertainment arts to come down. I just need the conscious arts to come up. All
Exactly.
right. So I'm not trying to pull anybody down. So just that those who are by nature conscious artists need to have the courage to be able to push that forward because Nigeria is in dire need of it.
No, and I like that you know, put in some of your family into answering that question. I mean, something must happen to someone's mind when you spend every day calling your brother share, so,
Exactly.
you
Exactly.
know,
Exactly.
but let me go to something you posted on Facebook this morning. I mean, in reposting our invite to this conversation, you said, I am doing my best to stand where I was made to stand, do what I was called to do, be who I was born to be. Some days it's easy and some days it's not. Can you help me unpack this statement? Because I read it on Facebook and I sat with it for a while. Um, and I guess what I struggled with was, were you made to stand there, or did you choose to stand there? And but when you mentioned the home and the kinds of conversations from your father, who I met once or twice, and your mom, who I know a lot, and I see her work, was it where you were made to stand, or was it a choice you made? And I think this is fun, really critical to our citizenhood as people.
It's a really good question, and it just shows that you really have a philosophical mind. This tension between free will and determinism. Fundamentally, I believe in free will. So, yes, it's a choice. But at the same time, it's a choice that almost seems inevitable based on where one is coming from. To
Mm,
choose otherwise would be to sort of violate who you are. It's a choice coming out of a sense of self.
hmm
I don't really, I chose to be a poet. I read law. I did a master's in law. I was the best graduating student in my class. I could have done anything I wanted to do, but I saw that poetry was a tool that could deal with a problem I had identified as a bottleneck problem better than any law degree could. And
mm,
so I intentionally chose to do poetry. And if you look at my track record, you'll discover that I always introduce myself as a poet. I never say I'm a law graduate, I'm a lawyer. I always say I'm a poet because it's intentional. It gives a sense of purpose and it also gives respect to the title because of the way you carry it. So
mm,
that's two. I chose to be in Nigeria. I did my master's in the UK, got married in the UK, could have settled in the UK, but I chose to come back to Nigeria because I realized that this was the arena of conflict, that this was where the work was, the work that would give my life meaning. I,
mm,
I could have work elsewhere that could give my life comfort, but not meaning. So that intentionality in choosing a tool and in choosing an arena of conflict, I really believe that it came from the way I was raised and then my faith, how I see the world, the fact that I believe in God. I believe that the world was created, I was created, and I was put in the world to do something. So there's faith and upbringing to me saying I was made to do this, I was called to
mm,
do this.
mm,
But I don't
mm.
negate the primacy of free will because God does not force you to do anything. He needs you to. It's like the Igbo saying, "Onyekwe, chiekwe."
Yeah. hmm
There's no compulsion. You have to say, yes, I accept and I will do this. And
Before
really
your
that is
God. hmm
yeah, exactly. That is what powers you. Without you willingly accepting it, then it becomes a burden that tires you out all the time. But your acceptance of it then becomes a self-generating energy source within you because you chose this path.
Mm,
You know.
mm, mm. In one of my favorite poems, "The Wall and the Bridge," you confront in the early stanzas, tribalism and everyday exclusions. You show how, as Africans, we We would not accept racism from a white man, but we tend to do worse, to each other on the continent, in Nigeria, etc. Why do these small everyday exclusions that you mentioned in the poem matter so much for national building? Why is inclusivity, and the need to break down these walls and build bridges, why it's that prerequisite to development? And if we don't deal with that, then development may never happen.
Thank you. I think it's fundamental to development in Nigeria because there's a cycle we go through regularly in this country. Generally, as a people, we spend 3 years complaining about the quality of governance, almost without exception, except you're working for the government or you're directly connected to the government. Everybody else who is outside of the government, regardless of where you come from, your religion, your ethnic group, we spend about 3 years complaining about the state of governance. Then in the fourth year, something happens that is shocking to the sort of neutral, objective mind. In the fourth year, we get an opportunity to choose people that can make a difference to the quality of governance. And all of a sudden, the conversation changes and it suddenly becomes about where does who come from, what is whose faith, and what is whose ethnic group. And that dominates the conversation for the season of elections. And then we make suboptimal decisions at the poll.
Mm-hmm.
And then immediately after, it's as if a fog lifts, and then we go back to complain about how bad the leaders are and things like that. And it gets one to realize the fundamental role that tribalism, bigotry, and bias play in our dysfunction as a nation, that it really prevents common victims of bad governance from ever standing together at critical moments.
Mm.
Over the last 5 years, we've had 2 major civic protests, EndSARS and bad governance.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell people that if those protests had happened simultaneously, Nigeria would have changed fundamentally. If those protests had happened simultaneously, if all the people involved in the 2 protests had actually acted as one, Nigeria would have changed. But what we found is that the EndSARS protest had its center of gravity in the south. And as a result of that, a lot of people in the north were reluctant to join and felt the urge to defend their own. Mm-hmm. And the end governance had its center of gravity in the north, and lots of people in the south have. So this is what happens all the time in Nigeria because of tribalism. There's always a significant section of the country that is excusing, abetting, covering, shielding bad governance for ethnic and religious reasons. And until we tackle that, until we remove that thing that stops a proper mass movement for good governance to develop in Nigeria, you're not going to have the social pressure, because it's pressure that brings about governance. Politicians simply react to pressure. It's not about being a good person or a bad person. If you can get away with it, you whatever you need to win the next election, you will. So until there is mass movement across ethnic and religious and regional divides, insisting that, look, fundamentally, when it comes to good road, good hospitals, good schools, we don't care what language you speak, what God you worship. We just want these things functioning. Until that happens, it will never happen. It will never function. And so that is the fundamental role that bigotry plays, that it stops the formation of a mass movement for good governance in Nigeria. It always fractures and fragments.
So it appears to me that one of the questions we need to answer, or at least explore, or at least deal with, is our original infraction, Biafra, right? Somehow we've swept it into a dark closet, hoping it's going to disappear. And then you write a poem, we're all Biafrans, and you say if you're hungry, if you're, suffering deprivation, you're Biafran. And you use this broad brush to paint all of us who are suffering the same thing as Biafrans. I understand what you're trying to do with that. But doesn't that also, in some weird way, stop us from exploring the key issue? Because now we say, oh, we're all Biafrans, so why talk about it? Do you feel that Biafra is something that needs to be addressed for us to move forward? If yes, how do you see us engaging in a safe way that conversation where all parties feel that they've been heard and that we can finally bury that issue and move forward?
Again, thank you for the question. The poem you're referring to, I wrote it many years ago, and my views on how to deal with Biafra has evolved over the years.
Mm-hmm.
I started by believing that perhaps it's something we should just, let's just forget it and move forward. And, so I wrote that was the space I was in when I wrote that piece. We are all Biafrans. But in the years that have passed since then, I have seen the error of staying silent over a traumatic historical event, how the stage can be seized by very toxic voices if we don't engage with it in a constructive way directly. And so since then, I've also evolved my strategy. And now I directly talk and address the issue of Biafra. At my center, what we did was we created an entire curriculum around the topic of 1966, the most traumatic year in Nigeria's history, the year of 2 coups and a pogrom. And we began to systematically engage with people from around the country, the North, the South, with this curriculum, this discussion, this conversation. And I believe that the way to go about it is, first of all, to establish an atmosphere of objectivity, which is where all voices, all narratives, all perspectives on the issue are heard, are tabled. As an Igbo boy, both my parents are Igbo. Both my parents were in the war. In fact, my parents met in the war. I wouldn't probably be here if not for the Biafran War. I grew up with the Igbo perspective on Biafra. I didn't know that there were other perspectives because the Igbo perspective starts on the 29th of May. Was it July? The second coup.
Yeah.
The counter coup.
The counter coup.
The Igbo perspective begins with the counter coup and sort of airbrushes the first coup, the 15th of January coup, and starts with the 29th of July coup. And that was the perspective I grew up with. But then as I began to engage, this was an evolutionary process for me. As I began to engage, particularly with people from the North, I suddenly realized that the 15th of January, there was an entire narrative around that date and what happened on that date and what it meant to other people. So I knew my hurt, I knew my pain, but I didn't know the hurt and the pain of others. And for the first time in my life, as an adult, I sat down and I listened. And that was a very revolutionary thing for me. For the first time to realize that the Igbo perspective is not at the center of this narrative, that there are other perspectives.
It's a single story.
It's a single story, and that nobody is an angel. Everybody's hand has blood on it. Everybody contributed to the disaster. So it's very important that we begin with that objectivity. When you get to the point where you just want to understand what really happened without necessarily wanting to defend what you consider to be as your side, just what happened. And maybe we need some depth, people to move a bit away from the incidents, be able to look back on it objectively. I think this is a generation that can do that.
That can deal with it. Exactly.
Get into that generation that can look back at things objectively and just say, look, this is what happened. This is what happened. This person did this person did. So objectivity is key. But then I also think that there needs to be a level of validation. People need to, right now we're in a place where when somebody says this thing you did hurts me, your answer is, why should it hurt you? In fact, what you did is worse than you did this to me. So we don't validate, we don't allow people to hurt. We shut them up by bringing up how they did that thing to me. It's like in a marriage. When you tell your wife, I don't like what you just said to me, and she said, after all, yesterday you said this one to me. But that's not how we deal. You can't deal with conflict like that in a relationship.
Yep.
If I say you hurt me, the first thing you should say is, look, I'm
Acknowledge it.
sorry. I didn't intend to hurt you. Even if you don't believe that you did anything wrong, I'm sorry that you feel hurt. That was not my intention. Because it makes me know that my feelings matter. So we need that kind of climate where every section of the country is validated. Look, how you feel matters. You can't just sweep it under the carpet. You can't say, oh, what Hausa people did to us is worse than what we did to. There's no worse or better, because hurt is relative and subjective to the person. And then moving on from that, we then need empathy to see the story through I know you know your own perspective. Listen to that person's perspective and see it through their eyes. Feel their hurt. I always say that you don't have the moral authority to sit in judgment until you empathize with all the parties involved. So to cut it short, we go through all the steps in terms of objectivity, validation, empathy, in creating an environment where people from different sides of the country are able to engage with the issue of Biafra, not just Biafra, 1966, because Biafra is a product of things that began before then, and begin to have honest and open conversations about this. And I can tell you that with the little experiments I've done over the last 2.5, 3 years, we've taken this course to Maiduguri, we've gone to Kano, we've gone to Port Harcourt, we've gone to Lagos, we've gone around the country to sit in with young people from different enclaves. It gives me a lot of hope, because for many people, it's the first time they're encountering a space where all narratives, all perspectives are respected and welcome. And there is no overt attempt to decide who is the wrong party and who is the right party, where we just want to learn so that we don't repeat these things going forward. And I think that we need to start having those kinds of structured conversations over historically traumatic events like the Civil War, like the coups, like some of the things that our founding fathers are reported to have said about each other that continue to define how entire ethnic groups view each other. Those kinds of conversations, we need to have them.
We might even need to go further back to pre-colonial times. And I think there's been a number of books in recent years that have dealt with those issues. So just to create platforms to share some of those perspectives could help us begin to unlock many of the mental issues we have. But maybe one more question on citizenship. And let me quote from your Made in Nigeria, poem Made in Nigeria. There's a verse there, this thing is made in Nigeria, not because it's broken, but because we agreed that broken is acceptable. I mean, my question here is, in weak institutional contexts, citizens often retreat into survival. You're advocating that we should, take agency, but what does meaningful citizenship look like when institutions cannot be trusted? Can we really blame Nigerians who have accepted what is as it is? And, isn't that a logical response from a survivalist perspective?
Yes, it is a logical response, and it is a response that you would expect from the majority. But thankfully, social change does not really require the majority. It just requires a few fanatics, fanatics. That's all it takes. Every country that has changed in the world, it just takes a few fanatics. And so it's not, it's human to wake up and say, look, this is the way my society is, and I'll just survive in it the way it is. it takes a bit, it takes something slightly abnormal to say, but can't society itself be different? Can't we try and change the incentives and the structure and to begin to try and do that? And so I've learned also in my own work not to try and I'm not trying to have mass appeal. I'm trying to find people who have that instinct in them to go counterculture or to go against the mainstream. Because really, if change is going to come, it's going to come from the fringe, from the lunatic fringe. It's not going to come from mainstream culture. That's the truth. And in that on that path, when we talk about institutions, like I know you know this very well, don't drop from heaven. They have to be built. It starts with one person, an example. One person does something, and then it begins to become a
NAFDAC, for
habit.
instance.
Exactly. Or even the famous two-term limit.
Exactly.
It was just the example of one person. For a long time, it wasn't even codified in the Constitution in the United States. It was just the example of the first president. Everybody just followed it. And now it has become this democratic institution all around the world. So institutions always start with one person having the courage of their conviction and then being able to inspire another person to follow down that path and another person. I have great faith in the power of small acts of faith. That just starts. Just starts. There is a snowball effect that builds up over time. If you are sincere and consistent in what you are doing, now with time it will gather the gravity it needs to shift things. So I agree with you, again, going back to the question, that it is logical for most Nigerians to behave the way they do. But there will be a radical, almost fanatical, lunatic fringe that insists that things can be different. And in the end, if change is going to come about, it will come from that fringe. And so we have to be active in mobilizing that fringe, organizing that fringe to continue what they are doing, thinking in a generational way. We may not see the fruit of what we're doing today, but if we put certain seeds in the ground, it might take 100 years. But that seed will germinate. I always tell people that, look, when they fought the War of Independence and in America, 1865, the slaves were freed in 1865, but it took another 100 years.
100 years.
100 years.
And another fight.
A huge fight for 100 years for the Civil Rights Act to be passed. This is the reality of social change. It's not a sprint. It is a marathon. And you have to have faith. You have to believe that what you're doing has consequences beyond your lifetime. That's what keeps you on the path. But because if you keep reading the news every day to see if what you said yesterday has had impact tomorrow, you're going to be discouraged. Exactly. But if you know that, look, I am what I'm bringing out is quality, and eventually quality shows over time. When history is looked at in 50 years, 100 years, 150 years, the quality rises to the top. This is the kind of faith you really need to engage in a struggle like this.
And I cannot agree more with you. I mean, one of your poems, The Beautiful Ones Are Born, kind of dwells on this subject. And just another line from the poem, the beautiful ones are not coming. They were never coming. We are the ones we have been waiting for. Just brilliant, beautiful lines, that kind of make your point. But another poem, The Law of Prosperity, no nation ever prayed itself into greatness. No people ever shouted their way into order. Can you unpack those lines? Is Africa's leadership crisis a moral one primarily? Is it institutional? Or is it just imaginative, that we haven't been able to see in ourselves, see what could be, and know that we're going to work it out through the work of our hand versus prayers, expecting that someone is going to descend from heaven to do it for us. What are your thoughts on these issues?
Yes, I definitely think that the way we've, engaged with religion in this part of the world has not had a very positive impact on social struggles in terms of the belief that we can all go to heaven while our homes and our communities on earth are going to hell. And somehow there is a personal salvation that shields you from collective trauma, which is not correct. That in places where faith has played a very strong role in social struggles, you've had a more you had a faith that had a social conscience that realized that it was a sign of faith to engage with making your physical space and your world a better place. That God is not really going to come down to make these things happen, that He works through you, through the ideas and the energy He gives you. So I think that in my own estimation and analysis, some of the important triggers for social change, like the home, the school, the religious institutions, the churches, the mosques, it's very important that we start having messages coming through these institutions that awaken in listeners their responsibility, their primary responsibility for making change happen. But in terms of the quality of leadership or the type of leadership we have, I don't think it's a moral problem. I don't think it's an institutional problem. Like I said at the beginning, I think it is a question of we value the tribe over the nation. So we will choose the tribe or the religion, even when it means that our parents are dying we're having to fly them abroad because there are no hospitals where they can die in dignity here. Our children, people are actively choosing the poverty of their children, the ill health of their parents, unemployment, just to make a point that my tribe is more politically successful than your tribe, or my tribe is the dominant tribe in this place. That tribalistic mentality is a stronghold in our minds and needs to be broken. And until it's broken, every time we have to choose a leader, we'll rather choose one that makes the tribe look good than one that betters our own lives personally. So I think this is a values problem. I won't call it ethical, because in the mind of the maker, it's unethical. He's making the right ethical decision. It's a civic values problem, so that our leaders are more or less an accurate reflection of our civic values. Because we do this all the time at all levels of government. It's not just at the federal level. We do it at the state level. We do it at the local government level. We also do it even in our social associations, in our town hall meetings, our community meetings, our professional associations. The moment it is a choice of leadership, there is a mentality that switches on in the Nigerian brain that undermines the quality of decision making at that point. And I think that needs to be tackled head on all the time and called out for what it is. You must learn to pick people for what they can do for you as a person, as opposed to what symbolic victory they represent for your ethnic group or your religious group. We must learn to do that.
How are we going to do that? Because, I was just thinking, the person is, the voter is thinking, if we vote in someone from my religion or my tribe, then I win. It's the higher likelihood of that person helping my group is much higher than if it comes from another ethnic group or another religion. And this is despite the fact that evidence has shown us that that does not work. Buhari's town in Daura is almost overrun by terrorists. This is a former military general, president, civilian, 8 years, his own town, his village. Yeah. So if he's not able to do it, if Jonathan did not do it for people from Otueke, if whomever Obasanjo did not do it for the people from Abeokuta and wherever he's from, why is it difficult for us, especially young people? I mean, our population median age of 19. I can understand how my parents could be hung up on this ethnic religious thing, but these are young people. They've got phones in their hands. They see how it's working everywhere else in the world. Why is it difficult for us to get across to them to show that you've got to make the right decisions even from a selfish point of view, to favor you, not from an ethnic, but from someone who can deliver? Why is that a difficult communication to get across?
Because this thinking is wired into us. Foundations are very important.
Into us as Africans, Nigerians, or into us as human beings?
I think in this context of this conversation, I'm looking particularly at as Nigerians. It's wired into us as Nigerians. I don't think that this kind of mentality will be as strong in a country like Ghana, for instance, because Ghana had the fortune of a largely unified foundation. It has one founding father, all right? It makes a big difference. We don't have one founding father. We have three. So it's in our DNA to think in partisan ways. The people that we regard as the people that personified entire regions, the North, the West, the East, what they did, the politics they played, the examples they laid, became culture and tradition. So that even for young people today that don't know the history, Patrick, but they act, they have the same impulses without even knowing the history. They have the exact same impulses as people that came before them. Because it's the power.
Why do they have those impulses, Dike? So let's use the US, because you've gone there a few times, right? So the founding colonies, the 13 of them, they sent people to the Continental Congress. These are really, it's almost like a Congress of 13 nations. There was no unifying ethos, yeah? But somehow they wrestled out some semblance of a nation, yeah? They went to a civil war. They fought North and South, terrible carnage. Then they got out of it, and largely, you would say there is an America. Yeah. Those divides still exist. I mean, North and South, even now more pronounced, Democrats and Republicans. But in all of that, there is a sense of in God we trust. There is, the manifest destiny, the shining house on the hill, all of that stuff. Some of it you can say Hollywood helped create, some. Why aren't we? Okay, so what can we be doing differently that can help us create this new narrative such that the 19-year-olds, the 18-year-olds born in Lagos, in Enugu, in Port Harcourt can get this sense of, I am Nigerian and dude, you're my father, but that thing you're saying doesn't make sense. The evidence doesn't hold. Yeah. What is it that we're not doing? What is it that we can do differently?
There are some differences between us and America, but one won't go into the, nitty-gritty of it. Like, for instance, the fact that everybody there was a migrant, it was not anybody's indigenous land. And then they had one of the most powerful unifying things you can have, a common enemy, an existential common enemy early in their history and things like that. But that said, one of the most powerful tools for creating a national identity is storytelling. Storytelling. So even though you mentioned it in passing, Hollywood, the CIA invests in Hollywood. The government invests in Hollywood. Western countries all over the world, they invest in culture and arts, in creating the myth of nationhood, the myth of identity. It's the same in Germany, it's the same everywhere in the UK. I mean, the UK monarchy today, they are Germans, their origin is in Germany, but because of storytelling, they are more British than anything.
Mm-hmm.
What we lack in Nigeria is conscious, intentional, strategic, clear-sighted, non-sentimental storytelling to
Exactly.
create a national identity. Because all the building blocks are there. We've had over 100. Remember that Nigeria was, first of all, Nigerians have been coexisting long before Frederick Lugard got here.
Way,
As
way
a
before. Mm-hmm.
as a formal entity, we've been here since 1914. That's
Mm-hmm.
over 100, maybe going close
And
to
yep.
130 something years
Mm-hmm.
of coexistence. All those stories is what somebody, what not just one person, what the system has to be intentionally weaving together in songs, in cartoons, in novels, in that's where it comes from.
Mm.
National identity is fiction. Nation is fiction. It is not anything else. So those people that are good at telling it seem to have stronger national identities. Those that are not, don't. And in
Mm.
Nigeria, the truth is that you can count on one hand how many strategic, intentional, deliberate efforts have been made by the government at weaving a national identity. It's sort of left to, we have this sense that it will just happen. It will not just happen. What will just happen is chaos and conflict and people running back to their villages and their lineage. Look, even if we break up into different countries, those countries will start to break up because
Exactly.
that's also human nature. If
Mm-hmm.
it's not ethnicity, it will be your state. If it's not your state, it will be which part of the state you come from, your village, the part of the village you come. Next thing, it's your grandfather had 4 wives, me, I'm wife one. There's always a reason. So somebody has to be intentional about weaving a narrative that allows an identity to build. And that's what countries like America are very good at because the American narrative is very different from the American reality. If you look at the
Exactly.
reality of their country, built on slave trade, built on exploitation, all the divisions there, and yet the narrative of one America is so strong. And here, where we are all indigenous, we've been coexisting for thousands. The earliest human fossil in in Nigeria was discovered 13,000 years ago. So we've
Mm-hmm.
been living together in this space for at least 13,000 years. And yet our own narrative is of division and difference. I don't know you. It took a white man from London to come and introduce me to you. You can imagine the nonsensical nature of that narrative. So it's a narrative issue. And it's not in me. I know that I've been very intentional about it, but one voice is not enough. It has to be a
Enough. Mm-hmm.
systemic approach to
So
weaving narrative.
so I hear you. Government should play a role. Private sector should play a role too. So Nollywood has a core role to play. Why aren't we seeing a lot more of the historical epics, that tell our story and show how we've coexisted? You know, if we can buy and watch movies about fetish, juju, and so on, we will spend money on core narratives. And in the past, theater was a big thing in Nigeria and made money as well. So who should play that role? If you were invited by President Tinubu to design for us how we consciously shape this narrative, what are some of the elements that you pay attention to?
Patrick, I wouldn't even start with theater. I'll start with science.
Mm,
I'll call archaeologists, linguists, historians. You see, the narration is not just poetry and play. The scientific narrative has to be constructed to challenge that idea that Lord Lugard was the one that brought us together.
mm,
So Nigerian history has to start from at least 13,000 years ago. We can't even start with Oduduwa, Ezenri, and
mm,
Bayajide
mm-hmm,
because we are much, much older than that. So when I'm talking about narrative, I'm not just talking about you just sit down and write a feel-good poem. We'll go back to the facts, what the history of languages tell, that once upon a time, there was just one language here. That's what the history of languages tell. What do the stones tell about how long we've been living here? Those are the kind of facts, because narration is not propaganda. It's not that we're telling lies. It's just that there are things about ourselves we don't know anymore. For us
Mm,
to begin our history with Oduduwa shows that we have forgotten who we are. Because we
exactly.
were here before Oduduwa. Oduduwa met people here. Ezenri met people here. Bayajida met people here. And those people, their DNA is in us. West African, the human beings have been living in West Africa for one of the longest periods of time on Earth. So human beings have been here. But all of that is lost because we don't value, everybody is doing AI now. But you see, archaeology is very important to nation building. The study of languages is very important to nation building. Some of these humanities are very important. So I'll bring people like that. I'll fund research that begins to bring all these mythological origins we have. We have to replace them with something closer to what actually happened.
Happened.
Scientific origin of humanity in West Africa. So I'll bring these people together, fund research, let them be writing papers that show and explain these things. Then the artists, after reading those papers, can then begin to create fiction based on that foundation of fact, so that we're not just building castles in the air. So this
Mm,
is sort of what my own approach would be in terms of rewriting those narratives, particularly about our origin as a people here in West Africa.
mm. And just to say to our audience, we're going to open it up for Q&A, comments, questions, but please use the Q&A tab, not the comments tab. I know you're already typing in there. I can't see them, but just use the Q&A tab. I will pick the questions, read them out, and give, attribution to the person who posed the question or comment. But Dike, from your experience at the center, the Dike Chukwumerije Center for Social Change, what kinds of cultural work do you think can scale, and what should remain intimate and local? But what are some of from your experience over the last 2.5, 3 years, what are some of the things you're seeing that we can scale across the country and drive more impact? Because there's a limit to what you and the center can do from Abuja, but we need more of these centers all across Nigeria. What are some of the things you're learning so far that we can scale across?
Curriculum. We
Okay.
can we can we can develop curriculum that teaches, we don't have Nigerian studies, an area of studies, Nigerian studies. So we can develop curriculum about our history, our origin, things like that, which can be embedded in national curriculum so that children are learning different about the concept of Nigeria and this land. So that's one thing I have learned from my own experience, that if we have a curriculum, then things will spread much faster than just having one person somewhere sitting and saying things randomly. So definitely a curriculum would help. And
Okay.
we're developing one. We've
Okay.
developed one. It's just we need help to structure it in a way that can enter into the national curriculum.
Mm.
Because we
And
need to get these minds young.
are you thinking that curriculum should then be taken to schools and taught in schools, or through programs like the one the center runs?
I think it should be embedded in the national curriculum. So it's taught in schools.
Mm-hmm.
Those kind of programs I do can continue. But I think then these things need to be embedded in the curriculum so that we think differently about the geographical space.
Fantastic, fantastic. I have a question from Sheifumi Adebotu, and it says, many thanks, DK, for echoing these patriotic positions. I'd ask, without mincing words, beyond narrative, aren't we, Nigeria here, aren't we structurally better off regionally than this collectively lugaded entity?
Again, I like the question. The truth is, for me, I don't know whether we will do better regionally. Because if we look at the evidence, we had our greatest crisis as a nation at the exact time when we were structured regionally. We had our greatest crisis as a nation. So Nigeria is a country where we have tried almost every kind of political arrangement possible. We've tried parliamentary system, we've tried presidential system, we've had military constitutions, we've had democratically made constitutions, we've had a top-heavy federalism, we've had a bottom-heavy federalism, we've tried leftist economic ideology, we've tried rightist economic ideology. We've done almost every kind of things. Between 1914 and date, we've had almost 10 constitutions. It's almost a constitution a decade. So, in truth, I go back to what I said at the beginning. I don't think our problem is structural. It doesn't mean that you may be right that regional may give us extra benefits, but I don't think it will move us forward significantly without these changes in civic culture and attitudes. Nigeria is not a Lugadian contraption, for one. I understand the terminology.
Sentiment. Yeah.
We're really not. And I think some of the conversations need to start from that, from accepting your country as it is. It's like a child. You can't choose who your parents are or the you can't keep quarreling with who your parents were. You just say, okay, I am here, and from here I move forward. Okay. So there is theory that says that a diverse society as ours is better. We're a federal structure. I mean, that was Chief Obafemi Awolowo's thing. That was his major contribution to us as a nation, that look, we're diverse and therefore let's be structured as a federation. And therefore it stands to reason that the more federal we are, the better things should work. But the way Nigeria is today, decentralization may not bring the benefits that we want because of the civic culture that we have everywhere. You know what I mean? So I hope that kind of addresses your question.
And I think, Dike, I think we're already running that experiment now. If you look at what the current Electricity Act, that devolves power to generate and transmit and distribute electricity to the states, it is moving in that direction. So we'll see how that plays out and see if becoming smaller entities is the answer or not. But we'll see how it plays out. We've got a question from Carol Enajemo, and it's really about that we can tell these stories, we can create the films, we can do the theater productions, but how do we deal with structural constitutions or authorities not banning or restricting the works? Any thoughts on how to rein in the state if the state tries to kind of stop artists from telling the story?
I think I'm not. Let me be clear. Eventually, for change to come, the structures of state have to change. The institutions of state have to change. What I've been talking about is where change begins, not where it ends. Change begins for me in Nigeria with cultural change that leads to a mass movement of Nigerians who, regardless of tribe and tongue, are united in their demand for a better quality of governance. That when you have that mass movement will then be able to compete successfully with the current power structure and system and win, and then bring about the structural changes, institutional changes that we need to lock change in for the next few generations. So I'm talking about a value chain. I'm not saying that all we need to do is change culture and it ends there. I'm saying that that's where it starts. So the conflict with the state is inevitable because you're trying to change, you're trying to bring about new things. So people that are benefiting from the old system, when they finally realize what you're trying to do and that it's a threat to what they are currently enjoying, they will come after you. But at that point, it's a question of whether you can resist the pressure and push back. And that would depend on the strength of your own organization. Your victory can't be based on the weakness of your enemy. It has to be based on the strength of your own organization. which is why it's important to build a mass movement on the right civic values that can challenge and contest for power eventually down the line.
Fantastic. There's a question from Alvari Tafa. He says, hi, Dike, what are the pushbacks or points of resistance that you have met or experienced challenging the stereotypical nuances that plague us as a people? Thank you for your inspiring work.
My major challenges have so far been mockery. People who just think that I'm wasting my time. That's been the major challenge. People who think you're wasting your time, and they mock you and they insult you and they abuse you. And sometimes they question your motives. Everybody believes that anybody who is talking one Nigeria must be paid by the government or have a stipend from the government and things like that. So my main challenges have been psychological, overcoming that initial barrage of cynicism and mockery and abuse that I met. But over time, I have overcome it. It doesn't affect me as much. And I've also demonstrated to many people that this is me. I'm not playing to anybody's gallery. I'm just being myself here. There have been a few times when there was the danger of being hurt physically, particularly when you're going into places where maybe there is a violent secession or insurgency culture, and you're bringing, we've had to go into spaces like that with this kind of conversations, and then, there's a threat of violence, but generally, so far, we've not been victims of violence, of physical violence, just verbal violence.
So, Dike, I have a question from Engineer Chris Okeke. Do you think that an authoritative and dictatorial leadership, like we see in Rwanda, is essential to redirect our national ethos? And maybe if I tag on the back of that, there's this argument that at different levels of development, you may need a stronger dictatorial leader. And then ultimately, when the nation is able to stand, you can then move gradually to democracy. But that if you started out from democracy, given how broken things are, that you're not going to be able to achieve development. What are your views on this?
I agree with that. I don't call it dictatorial, but I call it law and order. I need a law and order leadership where rules are ruthlessly and mercilessly enforced, regardless of whose ox is God. And that you need that kind of leadership for at least a generation, which I consider to be at least 20 years, so that by the end of a rule like that, there's a generation of people who don't even know what tra means, who don't even know what jumping corners and cutting corners is. They just grow up in a society where people stand on cues. There are consequences for action. So I think you need that kind of regime. It doesn't necessarily have to be dictatorial. If you take the example of a country like Singapore, which was able to maintain a very strong leadership with very routinely and rigorously enforced laws, and yet did it democratically through party discipline and maintaining the same party. In fact, the same party has been ruling Singapore since Lee Kuan Yew is still the same party in power. Mm-hmm. So Lee Kuan Yew is a model I look to a lot because I'm wary about sort of proper authoritarian dictatorship, because if the person is locked into the wrong ideas, then we're all locked in there as well. So I think that sort of, even China, the fact that within the party there is competition of ideas is important, just to make sure that bad ideas can also be thrown out. It's not just a personality cult. But I definitely think that a party with a group of people that share the same ideology about moving a society forward has to be able to lock that society into a particular path for at least 20 years before you can say the society has changed. Because as long as there's somebody that still remembers Tra, that society has not changed. The moment you remove the pressure, these things will come back. So we need to raise an entire generation on a completely different, in a completely different context before we can start breathing and say, okay, we're in the clear here.
I have a comment, not a question, from Judy Asuni, who's done, very remarkable work in the Niger Delta. She says, mine is a statement, not a question. I'm delighted to find this young person who purposely chose a meaningful life over a comfortable, lucrative existence. So, big ups to you. But my question is, and you kind of started touching on it, but I wanted to, maybe deepen it a little bit. You said that the biggest challenge you've had is maybe just people who really don't understand what you're trying to do. So how do you guard against cynicism while still trying to remain intellectually honest with the message, with the craft? How did you deal with that, or how are you dealing with it? And I suspect there are others who are in the same space or looking to get in the space who may learn something from your experience.
When I first started out, I remember that the year that Buhari became president, 2015, was the year that I launched the Made in Nigeria
In
poetry
Nigeria.
show. Yeah. And you can also imagine that was the year where the IPOB rhetoric went through the roof. And here was I, this Igbo guy from the Southeast, at the same time that my region was lurching, towards this extremist ideology, going in the opposite direction, talking about one Nigeria. So the backlash it affected my mental health, in all honesty, because I had never experienced that level of vitriol and invective in my life. And at the beginning, I always try to engage with everybody. So if somebody comes on social media and is insulting and abusive, I would engage with their comments. I'll continue trying to explain, and this long thread would develop under my post where I found that sitting back, I was engaging more with the negative comments than with the positive ones, because the negative ones are the ones that keep you up at night. You don't see the positive comments as much as you see the negative ones, until somebody advised me to stop doing that I should stop using my page as an advertising platform for toxic comments. So and it suddenly made sense to me that I'm focusing on the negative instead of the positive, that there are many people that what I'm saying is inspiring them, but I'm completely neglecting them and just trying to convince somebody that is far gone, rather than trying to feed people that are hopeful. But, and I completely changed my strategy. So now what I do is I have resigned myself to the fact that you cannot fight without an army or an organization. So first of all, you have to gather around you people that actually believe in what you're saying and build them up to a level of strength before, as a group, you can now begin to engage with hostile people. So I don't focus on negative comments anymore. I focus on hopefuls, on feeding them, on building them, on us relating with one another and building one another up into a community. Because the environment had become so toxic where just saying that you love Nigeria became something to be ashamed of, something people attack you for. There are no safe spaces where people that think differently can just gather without feeling threatened. And I said that I would create such safe spaces. So now, if I post something on social media and you come with a obviously aggressive, toxic, I'm not here to engage comment, I just delete it or I hide it so that other people that are hopeful, are asking, don't see your comment and just shut up so that they can continue to talk. Because it's just like growing a seed in a nursery. You can't just expose it to the harshness of the environment from the beginning. You have to protect it
I
so that it
like
can
that.
then it can then be exposed. So that is the strategy I adopted. And honestly, it's done wonders for my mental health. It's also allowed me to begin to grow a small community or people that think like me, so that at least we can be growing together.
Mm. Let me get maybe one or two more questions in. This is from Eugene Edoga. Can we learn from the experience of Europe? The European nations were organized largely along cultural and linguistic lines. Now the nations of Europe are voluntarily coming together under the auspices of the EU to form a solid bloc that leverages their individual strengths. Can't we, as Nigeria, move apart and then come together through a renegotiated arrangement? What do you say to that proposal?
We can. We can, but where do we start from? When we say let's be like Europe, we jump forward and sort of forget the 100 years of war and carnage and bloodshed, and Europe also has a trajectory, and we have ours. You can't choose your trajectory. So from where we are now, if you say let's break apart, how does that happen? What would breaking apart look like? How do we do it? Are we going to do it violently? Or are we going to do it through a conversation? So for me, inevitably, whichever way you want to go, you have to have a conversation. You have to develop the capacity to talk to one another, to reason with one another, to see things from the same page, for us to move forward from where we are. So like I said, every nation is a construct. I'm not hung up on nations. I don't believe that I must have an Igbo nation or there must be a Nigerian nation. I just think that it's just a construct. For me, this is the one I have, so I'm using it. If tomorrow, it makes more sense for us to break apart, if we have developed the language of talking to one another, like they did in Europe after they fought their senseless wars and realized that in the end we have to talk. So everybody is now talking. And we're simply saying that here in Africa, rather than taking this violent route that always leads back to the negotiating table, why don't we just start learning now to talk to one another? And I'm willing to have that conversation about the benefits of size with anybody, particularly for an Africa that's looking to leapfrog in developmental terms, the benefits of size, So I disagree with him. Maybe when I say I believe in one Nigeria, it's not that it is one Nigeria or death or nothing, or Nigeria is a construct that we have, and I think it's a very good construct. I see all the advantages. I see the disadvantages, but I see the advantages very clearly of being a Nigerian and having a Nigeria. And I see what we would lose if we give up Nigeria and move into ethnic states, because those ones, they have their issues that we don't see now. When your state is defined on ethnic terms, it has a lot of issues that will start suffering later. But when your state is defined on civic terms, it has a lot of benefits, that you can leverage on. So whichever way you want to go, it begins with talking to your fellow citizens, the person across the line. You have to talk to them, or unless you say you're going to fight it out, which I think is a waste of time and lives.
Yeah. Maybe get another question in from Emmanuel Ube. Two questions, but I think the core of it is, what can young people do? So if you have young people today who want to engage, how can they engage? And he says, how can they engage constructively confrontational?
I like that. You can engage by the most revolutionary thing you can do as a young person in Nigeria today is to be yourself, is to be true to yourself. Because the system is going to label you as Niger Delta, Igbo, Fulani, Christian, Muslim. It's just going to slap that label on you and expect you to behave accordingly in your choices, in the way you relate to other people. But you have a nuanced pedigree. Whoever you are as a young Nigerian today, your pedigree does not resemble the label that the system is going to put on you. You're going to come from a mixed pedigree. You're going to come from a nuanced pedigree. And the first struggle that you can raise, revolutionary struggle you can raise, is a personal one, is the courage to say, the label that you are giving me is not reflective. It does not tell my story. And therefore, I am going to tell my story and I'm going to act the way I am. I'm going to be true to myself. If you can't even do that, everything else is just talk. You must first start with the personal courage to be true to self and to live the identity that you truly are, regardless of where Nigeria tries to pigeonhole you. I hope that helps, Emmanuel.
Very good. Very good. In Dike, in the closing stanza of The Wall and the Bridge, you write these lines. Every wall is a choice, every bridge is a choice, and the future is built one decision at a time. If you look out, say 20, 25 years from now, what's that single sign that would tell you that Nigeria is moving in the right direction, at least civilization direction, even if prosperity has not been fully attained, but that we're moving in the right direction, that we're breaking down those walls, that we're building bridges? What sign would you see that will tell you, okay, it may not be Uhuru yet, but we're making all the right steps?
One of the early things that I would see that would make me feel we're moving in the right direction is when communities have clear processes for integrating strangers. When at the community level, they will say, look, if you live amongst us for 5 years, you speak our language, you adopt our religion, you are one of us. No questions asked. Whatever those, even if they say if you live amongst us for 25 years, but there are rules for integrating strangers where somebody can arrive as a migrant, does A, B, C, and is accepted as a member of the community. I'll feel that we're moving in the right direction.
Fantastic. Is there any point you were hoping to make on this discussion that we've not gotten to?
I think you've covered the whole ground.
Excellent.
I had to say the name with respect because I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I mean, today we've tried to explore a simple but really demanding truth, that societies we live in are not accidents. They are works of our hand, shaped by what we tolerate, what we excuse, and what we choose to build day by day, sweat by every other drop of sweat. Dike has reminded us that culture is not decorative, but it's infrastructure. It's fundamental to development. That citizenship is not just a certificate or a passport, but a practice. And the future depends on the moral and civic choices of ordinary people and what they do every single day. The question now is ours. What bridges are we going to build? What walls will we refuse to maintain? Are we going to tear down? The work of our hand is not done, but at least we've begun the conversation, and it's now up to each and every one of us to take it forward. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a wrap for today's episode and the exciting discussions we've had in 2025. Please look out for the video summary of all the conversations we had this year and the essay that would go with it. Big ideas, important questions, real conversations. Until next time, I'm Patrick Okibo. Let's keep building the society we want to live in. Dike, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, and everybody who joined and stayed till the end. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.